quickly in this way. At 6 p.m. on the 22nd of April, with the wind blowing toward the Allied trenches, German troops released 168 tons of chlorine from over 5,000 gas cylinders. The wall of gas advanced across the battlefield. Since chlorine gas is 2.5 times heavier than air, it sank into the trenches of the Allied soldiers. Any soldier that inhaled a lungful of the gas suffered a terrible death. Chlorine irritates the mucous lining of the lungs so violently that they fill with liquid. The soldiers effectively drowned on dry land. More than 5,000 Allied soldiers died this way in the first attack.
Okay, let's see what our victory conditions are. Visit the elder's house. All 6 villagers escape safely. Where is said? Guess it's that. Big ass fucking eagle. That is some uncanny luck. Definitely be hitting a save. Any luck gone. Pretty rad.
Haber was promoted to the rank of captain. A week later, he was back home in Berlin. On the 1st of May, the Habers hosted a dinner party. And after the party wound down, Fritz took sleeping pills and went to bed. But that night, his wife Clara took his gun and went outside into the garden. And there she fired a single shot into her chest. Her 12-year-old son Hermann heard the shot and ran outside to find his mother as she lay dying. The next morning, Fritz Haber was on a train to the Eastern Front to supervise a gas attack on the Russian army. Some have claimed Clara killed herself because of her husband's obsession with chemical weapons, and that may have been part of it, but honestly we don't know, because no first-hand accounts survive that support this interpretation. What we do know is that Clara was deeply unhappy in her marriage. In 1910, after being married for 8 years to Fritz, she wrote to a friend, "What Fritz has won during these 8 years, that and still more I have lost." and what remains ahead of me fills me with the deepest dissatisfaction. After Clara's suicide, Haber spent the rest of the war running his institute, researching chemical weapons, gas masks, and pesticides. By 1917, the institute employed 1,500 people, including 150 scientists. It was like a mini Manhattan Project, but for chemical weapons. In total, 100,000 soldiers were killed by chemical weapons in World War I. When Germany surrendered, Haber was crushed. All the money he made from his ammonia patent was lost to hyperinflation. In an attempt to pay off Germany's crippling war debt, he tried to distill gold from seawater, but the project was futile. In 1933, the Nazis came to power and passed a law that all Jewish civil servants, including scientists, were to be fired from their jobs. Haber was Jewish, but he never practiced the religion. Regardless, his military service exempted him from the law, but he resigned from his role as director in solidarity with all the Jewish scientists who worked at the institute.
The next year, in a hotel room in Basel, Switzerland, he died of heart failure. Immediately after World War I, Haber's institute developed a cyanide-based insecticide. It had a barely detectable odor, so they mixed in a foul-smelling chemical to alert people to the danger. The resulting gas was called Zyklon B. A decade after Haber's death, the Nazis requested chemists remove the foul-smelling component. And this form of Zyklon B, the chemical developed at Haber's institute, was then used to perpetrate the Holocaust.
Thinking about this story, it would be easy to paint Haber as a villain, or as a hero, for inventing the process used to feed half the world. But another approach is to regard him as irrelevant to the larger story, because someone else would have figured out a way to process nitrogen out of the air, and other scientists were developing chemical weapons. Over the past few centuries, science and technology have improved our lives immeasurably, but they have also given us ever-increasing ways to destroy ourselves. I think it'd be great to believe that we could ask scientists to only work on problems that are good for humanity. But the reality is that every bit of information is a potential double-edged sword. You don't know the outcome of your research or how it might later be used. Ammonium nitrate is both a fertilizer and an explosive. So the real question is, how do we keep increasing our knowledge and control of the natural world without destroying ourselves and everything else on this planet in the process? So chemistry has made it possible for 8 billion of us to live on this planet and to have the standard of living that we do. But as a byproduct, we've changed the atmosphere, and now we're suffering the consequences in the form of more frequent and severe heat waves, among other things. Which brings me to an offer directly from me to you. I want to offset 1 month of your carbon emissions, and I'll do it with this video's sponsor, Wren. On their website, you can calculate how much carbon you emit and which activities have the greatest impact. And if you like, you can offset your emissions through a monthly subscription. But they don't just plant trees. One of the projects they're currently backing is a pilot study in Scotland called Enhanced Mineral Weathering. So the way it works is they spread small basalt rocks throughout forested areas. And then when it rains, those raindrops contain dissolved CO2 in the form of carbonic acid. And when the rain hits the basalt, it reacts and the pH increases. Now that turns carbonic acid into carbonates, like calcium carbonate, and that precipitates out. So in this solid mineral form, the carbon is trapped potentially for thousands of years. And this is the kind of chemical innovation we may need to solve the climate crisis. So if you want to join me in offsetting your carbon footprint, then click the link in the description. Wren is completely transparent about where they invest the money, and they'll send you monthly email updates. If you're one of the first 100 people to sign up, I will personally pay for your first month of CO2 offsets, which is not a standard offer. It is just something I really wanted to do. So I want to thank Wren for sponsoring this part of the video, and I want to thank you for watching.
Oh my god!
It's awful!
Damn, man, it's almost impressive at this point just how terrible the Resident Evil screen adaptations are capable of being. Like, every time I think they've hit creative bedrock, they somehow find a way to keep digging and reach even greater depths of shittiness. I mean, the Mila Jovovich movies were basically a gradual descent into insanity in their own right. It's like the filmmakers themselves couldn't quite believe that their movies were popular enough to justify sequels, to the point that each one basically ended up undoing the events of the predecessor so that it could go off in a completely different direction. And by the end, the cast and crew had fully transitioned into no fucks given territory.
Which means
but
I
holy
might
shit,
die
they were
if he
absolute
goes into
masterpieces
this
compared to
house.
Welcome to Raccoon City, a disastrous attempt to reboot the franchise by meshing together the plots of the first 2 games into a ridiculous mess of a story that nobody wanted. The script was idiotic, the acting was more wooden than an old-timey sailing ship, the action scenes made Book of Boba Fett look like Terminator 2, and the whole thing felt like it was done on a budget of about $500. In short, it was a garbage movie with a garbage script and a garbage production, and honestly, it seemed like Resident Evil had finally hit rock bottom. But there was worse to come, dear viewer, a lot worse.
Whoa! What is it? What? Oh! Oh no!
When a Resident Evil TV series was announced on Netflix, enthusiasm wasn't exactly a fever pitch. After all, Resident Evil fans
Resident
burned
Evil
more times
acting.
than Star Wars and Star Trek fans combined. But after
It
these
did it
short times
just
of confusion,
miss
when
a
the first promo
fucking
pictures and
house?
casting announcement came out, and we were treated to the baffling sight
Yeah,
of Reddick
it
as
missed the
Albert
house.
Wesker, not to mention a primary cast composed almost entirely of women. Was this really going to be another ridiculous race-swapped, intersectional feminist disaster drenched in heavy doses of the message? Or was it all just a big misunderstanding, and Resident Evil was destined to be the best video game adaptation of all time?
Chris, stop it.
No, Resident Evil is terrible. Not terrible as in it's a guilty pleasure like the Mila Jovovich movies. Not terrible in a clumsy, low-budget, well, they tried their best kind of way like Welcome to Raccoon City. No, this show is so bad that I genuinely don't even understand the thought process behind it. It's like Dawn of the Dead if Dawn of the Dead was made by the CW. A show that swings wildly between angsty teenage melodrama and post-apocalyptic survival story with absolutely no rhyme or reason. I'm gonna do my best to summarize this absolute nonsense, but don't expect any kind of detailed plot breakdown because to be honest with you, the less I have to talk about this shit, the better. Anyway, the narrative of Resident Evil takes place in two different time periods, split between the events leading up to a zombie outbreak in the present day and the struggle to stay alive in a post-apocalyptic world 14 years later. If I had to pick the one strand that's marginally less shit than the other, I'd say the post-apocalyptic future segments probably win out on the basis that at least some things actually happen in them. This is a world that's been devastated by a T-virus pandemic, reducing the world's population to a few hundred million holed up in fortified cities run by Umbrella, which seems to have become the de facto world government now. But there's still a few people working to make things better, including Jade, a strong, empowered female character who spends her days studying the zombies in the hopes of finding a cure someday. But along the way she runs into Umbrella strike teams, hostile survivors, mutated animals, and estranged family members now working for the enemy. It's a bit like playing Chris's campaign on Resident Evil 6, if Chris's campaign had been directed by Tommy Wiseau.
Why, Lisa? Why?
But then every so often the narrative will jump back to the present day, focusing on teenage Jade, along with her sister Billy and their father Albert Wesker, because apparently this is what Albert Wesker looks like now.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
And also, this is what twin sisters apparently look like. The world doesn't make any sense to me anymore. Anyway, the Weskers have just moved into New Raccoon City, a creepily neat corporate town in the middle of nowhere, run by everyone's favourite purveyors of insanely impractical viral weaponry. The girls are pretty different in terms of their personalities. Jade's outgoing and sociable and makes friends easily, while Billy's shy and awkward, and vegan, because of course she's fucking vegan. It's almost like they set out to make a character as unlikable and preachy as possible. Anyway, when she spots some animals being shipped into Umbrella headquarters, she begins to suspect that the company is up to no goods. Really? You think? So she does the sensible thing and sneaks back in there with Jade one night, because apparently two teenage girls can easily sneak into the high security headquarters of a major pharmaceutical company with no problems whatsoever. But oh no, they accidentally release a zombie dog and Billy gets bitten, and then Albert shows up to save the day and sends the girls home so that he can cover the whole thing up. Because I guess security men, night watchmen, and any kind of live video feeds are just not a thing in this world. So anyway, the main focus of the present day stuff is the tension over whether or not Billy is going to turn into a zombie, the girls' growing suspicion that their dad isn't everything he seems to be, and their efforts to gradually uncover what exactly Umbrella is hiding. And this is where Resident Evil mutates from a boring, uninspired zombie show into a living nightmare that genuinely had me wishing for a real-life zombie apocalypse so that it could bring my suffering to an end. I mean, call me crazy, but I'm willing to bet that out of all the things that could possibly appeal to fans of the games, the angst and tedious social hang-ups of two asshole teenage girls have got to be pretty far down that list. Honestly, who the hell was this show even supposed to appeal to? The kind of people who actually find teenage dramas interesting are going to check out the moment the zombies show up, and the people who just want zombies and action and guns are going to be bored out of their minds by all the teenage angsty stuff. Instead of complementing each other to produce a full and complete story, the split narratives end up competing and cancelling each other out. It doesn't exactly help that neither character has anything even resembling likability. Billy is whiny, boring and pathetic for most of the early segments, while Jade is arrogant, patronising and aggressive. So basically like every female character written these days, she consistently manipulates and uses others for her own benefit, expecting them to put themselves in danger without ever considering the repercussions. She takes ridiculous risks and consistently ignores warnings from people more knowledgeable than herself, and she's even an asshole towards her own father, openly disobeying and insulting him. Why exactly is this idiot the protagonist again?
I can't figure it out at all.
Both girls are insanely stupid and irresponsible. Like, at one point Billy's been infected with the T-virus and potentially only has a couple of hours left before turning into a mutated flesh-eating zombie, so instead of going to a hospital or safely isolating her in a secure place in case the worst happens, the two girls instead do the sensible thing and go to a house party with hundreds of innocent people in attendance.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber.
Yeah, fucking genius. Their motivations flip on a dime as well. In the first few episodes, Billy is the one who suspects Umbrella of wrongdoing and pushes Jade to help her get to the truth. But then like 2 episodes later, she's perfectly happy to sit back and assume that everything's A-okay, while Jade becomes the one that's pushing for answers. Why? Don't know. Another time, after running into a conspiracy theorist who cast doubt on their parentage, they realise that their dad has never actually told them a single thing about his family, his childhood, or even where he was born, and they just never really thought to ask him about it until this precise moment. What the fuck? You're seriously telling me that you've never once asked your dad a single question about his life before you were born? I mean, if you've lived with someone for years, or even decades without really knowing a thing about them, that should be a very obvious red flag that they're probably hiding things from you. Oh, and in case you didn't pick it up from the trailers, Resident Evil takes place in a magical fantasy world where about 90% of all military, scientific, executive leadership and general positions of authority are held by women, because that's totally how things work in the real world. The male characters generally fall into one of two camps, either comically stupid and ineffective morons whose only real job is to get killed, or passive, effeminate beta males that are perfectly happy to be treated like shit, never stand up for themselves, and generally act like they're sorry for even existing. Honest to God, when is this Hollywood trend of open disdain and hatred for men and masculinity going to do the world a favour and just fucking die? The cast is made up mostly of talentless nobodies who sleepwalk their way through their scenes, rattling off their atrocious dialogue with all the enthusiasm and commitment of a fat positivity activist at a CrossFit tournament. Watching Evelyn Marcus interact interacting with her wife is almost physically painful. It adds absolutely nothing to the story, and seems to exist for no other reason than so the writers can make it very clear that she's married to a woman. Wow, groundbreaking stuff in 2022. The only person here with actual talent and ability is Lance Reddick, and goddamn, I feel so sorry for this dude. He might have been horribly miscast as Albert Wesker, but I hope he at least got a decent paycheck because he's way better than this show deserves. They've even got him dressed up like fucking Blade. Also, I'm genuinely still trying to make up my mind which is worse. The fact that the show basically ignores everything to do with the Resident Evil video games, their characters and events, or the half-arsed dumb as fuck attempts it makes to reference them. Remember the Moonlight Sonata? Remember Lisa Trevor? Remember Lickers? Remember the Tyrant? Like in episode 5, when Dumb and Dumber have to decipher a torturous series of clues left by their father so that they can access a bug-out bag with money, passports and weapons inside. Like, how the fuck is this supposed to be helpful? The whole point of this ridiculous plan is to warn the girls of impending danger so that they can leave with vital supplies at a moment's notice. Solving riddles and methodically overcoming complex problems is just fine when you're poking around some creaky old mansion with all the time in the world, but not in a fast-paced, high-pressure situation like this. It's a perfect example of the complete lack of thought, logic, or common sense that permeates every single inch of this absolute turd. Nothing in this show makes sense. Every character acts, talks, and makes decisions with all the savvy and intellect of a 10-year-old with learning difficulties. The pacing is utterly nonsensical. The dialogue sounds like it was written by someone that's never heard actual humans conversing with each other, and it's all crowbarred in with half-assed callbacks and references to the games that I'm willing to bet nobody involved in this shit show actually bothered to play. It's the absolute arrogance of writers and showrunners who wanted to tell their story, push their messages, work with their characters, because what they want is so much more important than what the paying customer wants. Why bother to do a faithful adaptation of the games when you can just tell a completely different story, slap the Resident Evil name on it, and call it a day? Honestly though, if I'm in the business of pointing fingers, then I'm gonna blame Capcom for this shit show. After all, they're the ones that had to sign off on this, and they did. I mean seriously, have you guys never even heard of quality control? Do you not realise that every embarrassing failure like this does nothing more than degrade the Resident Evil brands? I mean, how could you have read this script and thought, yeah, this'll turn out great, can't see why our fans wouldn't enjoy this one? Resident Evil on Netflix is without doubt the worst possible Resident Evil experience that I've ever had. Even the Mila Jovovich movies at their worst had some element of campy fun that you could appreciate. Even Welcome to Raccoon City had vaguely recognisable characters and locations, but this was nothing but 8 hours of absolute, abject misery. It's something that I never want to see, talk about, or think about ever again, and it's pretty much the final nail in the coffin of the idea that we'll ever get a decent Resident Evil screen adaptation. Hope you're proud of yourselves, you absolute dicks. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
Las Vegas is one of the most well-known cities anywhere in the world. Tens of millions of people visit it every single year who contribute to making it the 3rd most visited city in the United States by foreign tourists, just behind New York and Miami. Las Vegas receives so many foreign tourists that it beats out many other major tourist hotspot cities across the world, like Los Angeles, Chicago, Shanghai, Barcelona, Berlin, Vienna, and even Venice. In order to accommodate all these visitors, Las Vegas possesses a truly impressive hospitality arsenal of around 150,000 hotel rooms, which is more than any other city on the planet has got. And this is despite the fact that Las Vegas itself is a relatively young city, having only existed for a tad longer than a century and with a relatively small metropolitan population of only a little more than 2.2 million people, which only ranks it as the 26th largest city in the United States. But Las Vegas' size and age are irrelevant factors to the massive volumes of tourists who arrive here every single year. For them, they almost all come for just one single thing: Vegas' legendary reputation as the entertainment
farm a bunch of levels here.
and the greatest playground for adults anywhere on the earth. Along with
This
Louisiana,
guy's got a
the state
sword
of
with
Nevada, where Las
unlimited
Vegas is located,
uses.
is the
Just
only
let
American
him
state
kill
to
everybody.
fully legalize casino gambling statewide, which has long caused Vegas to be almost synonymous with gambling and casinos. Around 8 in every 10 visitors to the city will gamble at one of the numerous casinos while they're there, and bet an average of around $600 a person, while slightly more than half of all visitors will attend one of the many shows hosted in the city as well. Altogether, these tourists visiting the city generally contribute more than $100 billion per year to the Nevada state economy, and place Las Vegas as one of the top travel destinations in the world. But the strangest aspect of the city for me, as someone who spent much of their childhood growing up in Nevada with more visits to Las Vegas than I can even count, is the fact that all of this outrageous entertainment and excess for tens of millions of people all seemingly exists precisely where it shouldn't, in the middle of the driest and least hospitable desert of the North American continent, the Mojave Desert. This is the same desert that includes Death Valley after all, the ominously and appropriately named valley located just a 2-hour drive from the Las Vegas Strip that recorded the hottest temperature ever measured on the surface of the Earth, a little more than a century ago in 1913, at 134 degrees Fahrenheit, or 57 degrees Celsius. The Mojave Desert is so dry that the area around Las Vegas itself only receives an average of around 4 inches of rainfall per year, which is even less rain than Timbuktu receives in Mali, at the southern edge of the Sahara Desert. In 2020, Las Vegas set a still-standing record of going 224 entire straight days without a single drop of rainfall. And the reason for Las Vegas's extreme dryness is almost entirely geographical. The Mojave Desert itself is located entirely east of the towering Sierra Nevada mountains of California, with peaks as high as Mount Whitney at 14,505 feet, the highest highest point anywhere in the contiguous 48 United States, and a mere 85 miles away as the crow flies from the aforementioned Death Valley, the lowest point on the North American continent at 282 feet beneath sea level. These towering mountains block most of the moisture that blows into North America from the westerly winds of the Pacific, and they therefore cast what's known as a rain shadow across their east, where the moisture coming in from the Pacific fails to penetrate into. Of course, Las Vegas itself is located directly within this rain shadow cast by the Sierra Nevada, but it's also located within a valley here that's surrounded by even further mountain ranges on every side, some of which soar up to 10,000 feet in elevation and block even more moisture from blowing into the city with the wind from beyond. And the nearest significant river and source of fresh water to this valley, the Colorado, is around 30 miles away from it. In short, this valley was never historically a very attractive location to build even a settlement, and much less a modern metropolis of 2.25 million people. And as a result, it was basically nothing of any more significance than sparsely populated desert for thousands of years until the very beginning of the 20th century, when the city of Las Vegas was officially founded in 1905 and incorporated in 1911. But for the next several decades afterwards, Vegas would remain relatively sleepy and quiet until 1931, when two major things happened that would change the region's demographic destiny forever afterwards. With a tiny population of only 94,000 people statewide, Nevada was by far the least populous state in the country at the time, with less than half the population of the next least populous state, Wyoming. Reeling from the economic fallout of the Great Depression and struggling to find anyone who was willing to invest in their tiny state economy, the Nevada state government decided on a bold course of action. They became the first U.S. state to legalize nearly every form of gambling in order to bring in at least some kind of economic relief to their state. And perhaps even more importantly, 1931 also marked the beginning of the construction of the Hoover Dam on the Colorado River just 30 miles away from the city. And perhaps even more importantly, never before in human history had such a monolithic structure ever been built with concrete. Thousands of laborers moved in and worked tirelessly for years to finish the job, and at least 115 of them lost their lives trying. But with the thousands of new workers coming into the town for the dam construction came higher demands for things like entertainment and amenities. And with the recent legalization of casino gambling, the genesis for Las Vegas' status as the entertainment capital of the world was born. When the dam was finished in 1936, it created the largest water reservoir in the entire United States just behind it, in the form of Lake Mead, and granted the southwestern United States the ability to generate enormous amounts of electricity through hydropower. The Colorado River is ideally suited for hydroelectric power generation owing to its large flow and steep gradient descending from its source high up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado towards the lower elevations of the Mojave and Sonoran deserts. With massive volumes of water pumped to the city directly from Lake Mead and massive amounts of electricity from the dam, investment finally began pouring into Las Vegas and its unique entertainment industry following the Second World War, and the population began to steadily increase. By 1960, Las Vegas had finally overtaken Reno to become Nevada's most populous city with 64,000 people, and the population would roughly double from there over the next decade to more than 125,000 people by 1970. More people than lived in the entirety of Nevada just 30 years previously from then back in 1940. Between 1990 and 2000, the population of Las Vegas roughly doubled again, and by the close of the 20th century, Las Vegas had earned the distinction of being the most populous city in North America that was founded within the same century, just like Chicago had been during the 19th century. But as Las Vegas's fortunes and population continued to soar, so too did the demand in the region for the area's sparse supplies of water. With its crippling lack of rainfall, the population of Las Vegas and southern Nevada is overwhelmingly dependent upon Lake Mead and the Colorado River that feeds it from the snowmelt of the Rocky Mountains, accounting for some 90% of all the city's fresh water today. Back in the 1920s, prior to the construction of the Hoover Dam, the 7 American states that controlled territory within the Colorado River's basin agreed to the Colorado River Compact, an agreement that divided control of the waters within the basin amongst all 7 of the states. The upper states of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico would be entitled to roughly half of the Colorado River's water, while the lower states of California, Arizona, and Nevada would be entitled to the other half, with nearly 59% of that half going to California, 37% to Arizona, and just 4% to Nevada. But the realities of the 1920s were very different from the realities of today. One of the biggest concerns of the agreement both then and now was the expanding population in the Southwest, particularly in Southern California, and the resulting increased demand over time for water in the lower basin states. At the same time, Las Vegas wasn't even really a factor at all back in the 1920s, with a population of less than 3,000 people. But with a modern population well in excess of over 2 million, Nevada has been looking for an increased share in the river's water now for decades. But today, there are more than 40 million people who depend on the Colorado River for their water supply, and Las Vegas is only a small fraction of that. And at the same time, the Colorado River's water has actually been greatly over-allocated for decades now, because the original estimates of the compact back in the 1920s suggested that the river had an annual average flow of about 17.5 million acre-feet of water that reached the lower basin states of Arizona, Nevada, and California. However, these estimates back at the time were based on just the past 30 years of records going back to the 1890s, which were all the records that the people of the 1920s actually had available. And modern 21st century studies of tree rings in the area have revealed that those 30 years of records they used just so happened to probably be the wettest period in the American Southwest any time in the past 5 to 12 centuries. In other words, the authors of the 1920s era compact were grossly misinformed on the actual historical average levels of water within the river, and more water has been being allocated to the states around it than actually exists within the river almost ever since. And then climate change, decreased rates of snowfall in the Rocky Mountains, and droughts have been making everything much worse. And the situation has now gotten so bad that the Colorado River today rarely even has enough flow left in it to make make it to its natural delta in the Gulf of California and Mexico, where the once rich natural environment has almost completely died there and dried up. This also means that Lake Mead itself, the source of most of modern Las Vegas's freshwater, is rapidly shrinking in size. Last month in June of 2022, the reservoir hit a new all-time low after losing nearly 180 feet of depth over just the past 20 years. If the levels drop by another 100 feet, the Hoover Dam will no longer be capable of producing any hydroelectric power. But as it has always done now for the past century, Las Vegas is rapidly learning how to adapt to this changing environment, and fascinatingly, despite being well-renowned as a city of tremendous excesses, Las Vegas is one of the most water-efficient cities in the entire world, because they have no other choice but to be. Remember when I said that Nevada is only allocated 4% of the lower Colorado River's water? That amounts to just around 300,000 acre-feet of water today, which isn't really a lot when considering that California takes more than 14 times that amount from the river. But the catch is that so long as the water is returned back to the river, it doesn't actually count against the state in terms of total consumption. This loophole means that the Southern Nevada Water Authority will usually draw around 445,000 acre-feet of water from Lake Mead during a normal year, or about 40% more than they're technically allotted for. But since the city is capable of cleaning and returning around 220,000 acre-feet of water back to Lake Mead during the same year, Nevada's total consumption from the river is usually more like just 225,000 acre-feet, and well beneath their total allotment. In order to achieve this incredible rate of water recycling, the city of Las Vegas has enacted a number of ingenious policy and engineering decisions. The city has been designed in such a way that every last drop of water that ends up being used indoors gets cleaned and recycled directly back to Lake Mead. You could, quite literally, turn on every
Oh, shit.
single shower and every single sink in every hotel room in the city, and it wouldn't ever consume any more water because it would all just flow through the city sewers directly to water treatment plants and then directly return all clean back to Lake Mead for future use. And further, watering lawns within the city limits was strictly limited to just a single day a week. And largely because of this focus on sustainable desert design, Las Vegas actually managed to reduce their total water consumption dramatically by 26% over the past 20 years since 2002, despite having added an additional 750,000 new residents to the total population of the city over the same time period. And they aren't finished reducing their water consumption either. The first type of law of its kind in the United States, Las Vegas banned non-functional and decorative grass in the city last year in 2021 to save even more water. Grass has been getting torn out across city-owned property across Las Vegas ever since, and it's going to make an enormous difference. 1 square foot of grass consumes 73 gallons of water a year in order to keep alive, while more drought-tolerant desert landscaping only consumes 18 gallons a year. City officials are spending millions of dollars trying to convince current homeowners to tear out their grassy lawns and replace them with more water-friendly desert landscaping options. The Southern Nevada Water Authority believes that these simple landscaping measures favoring sustainable desert landscaping over non-functional grass will save around 9.5 billion gallons of water a year, which is nearly 10% of Las Vegas's total water supply. In a lot of senses, Las Vegas is the model city for the rest of the southwestern United States as the region faces increasingly harsher drought conditions and decreasing water supplies. As the American government just recently issued its first ever declared water shortage for the Colorado River this year, it has cut water allocations to all the states along the river, including Nevada's, from 300,000 acre-feet to just 279,000 acre-feet, which, when factoring in the rate of Las Vegas's incredible rate of water recycling, is still enough to meet current demand, but for how much longer? Many climate experts are warning that water levels within the Colorado Basin will likely continue to drop over the next several decades, when combined with the ever-increasing demand for water from the still growing population across southern Nevada, Arizona, and southern California. The life for the desert communities here are almost certainly going to continue growing ever more challenging from a water security perspective. The fact simply is that, in the future, the other cities of the American Southwest and everywhere else in the world who will struggle with water supplies in the near future should look to Las Vegas for their inspiration of a city well designed to cope with the challenges of 21st century climate change in the middle of one of Earth's least hospitable desert environments. For if life can be sustained for millions of people and tens of millions of visitors here through decades of clever design and foresight, it can also be achieved elsewhere. Now, a major reason that I was so excited to make a video covering this topic is because I knew that I could get all kinds of spectacular footage of Las Vegas and the Colorado River without actually having to go travel and visit them myself by simply visiting my stock footage provider instead, Storyblocks. Without any exaggeration, since the very first real-life lore videos that I created more than 6 years ago now, Storyblocks has always been the first place that I've always gone to find footage for all of my videos. They offer an unlimited subscription so that you can download and use as much as you need for an annual price that's lower than what many other providers charge for just a single clip. And beyond that unlimited subscription, Storyblocks also offers an entirely royalty-free library, meaning that you can use anything from the library for any commercial or personal use. And Storyblocks offers far more than just footage and templates. They also provide music, images, sound effects, and much more. If you're already a creator or you're wanting to become one, I can absolutely tell you from my more than 6 years of experience now as their customer that Storyblocks is an absolutely critical resource for you to have. I genuinely don't think I know of a single full-time creator who doesn't already have a subscription with them. So if you'd like to get started with them as well, click the button that's here on screen right now, or head over to storyblocks.com/reallifelore to sign up, and by doing so, you'll also be greatly supporting my channel at the same time while you're at it. And as always, thank you so much for watching.
Nerderotic.com.
The Rings of Power Comic-Con trailer makes fan complaints look stupid. The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power's San Diego Comic-Con trailer proves that a lot of the criticism aimed at the show doesn't make sense. Who is calling out the fandom in such a way? Is it a Tolkien professor? Is it a Tolkien expert? Is it a Tolkien superfan? No, it's an eternal student named Marcelo who writes for Screen Rant, and I'd like to thank him for writing this low-hanging fruit that I'm going to pick, and we'll get into his credentials in just a moment. But first, I need to acknowledge something. You guys are brilliant. We just passed 500,000 subscribers. You have been abused, besmirched, minimized, dehumanized, demonized, unpersoned, slandered, libeled, and underestimated at every turn, and you have stood strong. And I'm just happy to be one of the channels that you guys subscribe to in this growing fellowship, and for that, I am forever grateful. Now, I did go to San Diego this past weekend. Unfortunately, I didn't spend a single second inside the con because I got sick, but it doesn't matter. You're actually in a better position to see what's going on if you're not there, and this was Amazon's big play. They spent the most money there, and yeah, some might argue that they outshined the MCU, which abruptly ended Phase 4 and announced a boring Phase 5 and 6 with some underwhelming trailers. Warner Brothers wasn't there at all, except for one trailer that I do think was much better. But first, let's get to the Comic-Con trailer. You know, the one that makes all the fan complaints stupid, according to Marcelo Latte, the Eternal Student. And if you don't believe me, just look at his bio. The boy's an Eternal Student. Again, I'm not going to read this whole thing. He has been a student and a tutor. He has lived in 3 different cities, all to pursue the best education he could have. He still has some work to do. Although his chosen field was structural engineering, maybe, there is nothing Marcelo likes better than writing about the things he loves. This includes Marvel and DC superheroes, non-linear movies, Fast and Furious cars, and a galaxy far, far away. No mention of Tolkien. Now, before I read this incredibly bad title again, I would just like to point out that the word rings is in it twice. Unfortunately, and yes, we're going to start out with a spoiler, there is no rings in Season 1 of The Rings of Power, and I'm not kidding. The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Comic-Con trailer offers audiences the best look at Prime Video's Lord of the Rings show, and it proves how unjustified a lot of the criticism aimed at the upcoming series really is. Less than 2 days after The Rings of Power's first official teaser was released, a new trailer, which is essentially a teaser because it doesn't tell us anything, was released at the San Diego Comic-Con, revealing new locations, characters, and potential storylines for Prime Video's Middle-earth show. Does it actually name any of these places, name any of these characters, tell you about situations or events? We'll find out. Despite the exciting previously released teasers and promotional pictures, there was still a portion of the audience, just a small tiny portion, who believed Amazon's The Rings of Power was not being truthful to Tolkien's vision, a complaint that the newest Rings of Power trailer puts to rest. Does it now? Currently, at time of recording, there are 243,000 dislikes on a trailer with 10,658,077 views with only 74,000 likes. Those are verifiable, by the way, and extremely low with something with that many views, proving that they are paying for them via embedded video, which is a long-standing practice that generally doesn't generate a lot of interaction. I digress. He then goes into Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, trying to pick that apart, and the unfortunate Hobbit that is fortunately going to look a lot better after the Rings of Power. So we'll skip that entire paragraph because those arguments are stupid and get to the next stupid argument. Given how far back in the timeline the Rings of Power takes place compared to Frodo's story, it makes sense for the Prime Video show to look relatively different from Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies. However, that did not stop a portion of the audience from criticizing the Rings of Power as not being faithful to Tolkien's novels, because it isn't, and I'm still waiting for you to prove us wrong on that, but a
And they're really trying to throw a lot of story into a game that should mostly be about the combat. Not exactly a bad story. Horsies.